All right, everybody. Welcome back to our weekly show here. So if you're a home care agency owner trying to push past 2 million in revenue, or you're planning to at some point, this is the episode you want to watch. Today, what we are going to do is we're going to dive into 5 key things that high performing agencies tend to do differently so that they can maximize their profit margins while scaling. Okay. We're going to talk about pricing, we're going to talk about caregiver compensation, reducing overtime, and I'm going to talk to you guys about some real time financial benchmarks, from some of our top clients that so that you can see exactly where your numbers should be, or you can come on and tell me I'm wrong and that your numbers are much better. So let's go ahead and break down how to grow smarter, not just how to grow bigger. All right. So this is our weekly Facebook Live. And if you're watching us on the replay on YouTube, please, don't forget to, give us a like, share this episode with somebody who you think will benefit from it, and subscribe to the channel. We appreciate you guys coming back week after week, even though, I do need a haircut right now. Um, Hopefully, it doesn't scare you guys away too much. So before we get started with anything else, go ahead, give us a like right now, and let us know in the comments or in the chat, where are you guys watching this from? Let us know so this way we know where your business is, and also, um, you know, here's just another question for those of you watching, regardless whether you're watching live or if you're watching the YouTube replay, or if you caught us on some other social media platform. What stage of business are you in? Have you made it to that $2 million mark? Are you stuck? Are you moving into that, over 2 million, trying to head into the, pushing towards that $5 million benchmark? Where's your business? What stage are you in? Let us know in the comments, because this is what lets us know what to do with topics moving forward. You know, um, and it helps us, like I said, just encourage us. So, for those of you who don't know, my name is Julio Briones, and I am the CEO and founder of Briones Consulting Group. We, we specialize in working with agencies, home care, home health, hospice, private pay, and even in the Medicaid and Medicare space. Not just how to grow your business through sales, but also how to optimize your business so that you can get ready for your own eventual exit from the business. Because, like a very good friend of mine says all the time to me, whether it's through retirement, inheritance, or a body bag, you're eventually going to exit your business. So you may as well get the most out of it while you can. Okay. So this week we're going to start with something a little bit different. This week we do a post all the time about your weekly wins, and we're just going to go through and I'm going to celebrate your wins with you guys. I'm going to apologize ahead of time if I screw up your name. Some names are very, very simple. Some of you I've had the pleasure of speaking with, so even if your name's a little more complicated, I I hopefully do not mess it up too bad. But but let's go ahead and let's give it a shot. All right. So our first comment here is from Shegun Ogunbi. Okay. I again apologize if I said that wrong. All right. So his weekly win is finishing up a book by Ryan Dice, Get Scalable. Says I would love it. Happen to know Shegun. He's a really decent guy. If you guys are in the Houston area and looking for a consultant to help you with licensing and getting your business off the ground, absolutely the guy to see. All right. So hey, I'm definitely this book already is on my list of books to read. It was on beforehand, and hearing that you enjoyed it definitely makes me want to read it a little bit more. Next, we have Miss Kristen Danielle Dunn, who says, we have two individuals moving into our new shared living home. Big congratulations. Business growth is always great. You know, always something to celebrate, and we should definitely celebrate that with you. All right, and next is we have Mr. I hope it's Mr. Duma Darling Chabo, Mister. I apologize. I shouldn't have assumed anything. Says they got a great review from a current client. Once again, congratulations. Social media, I talk about this pretty regularly. I used to talk about it a lot more. There's some concept called social proof. And those of you who are not seeking out social proof, you know, those are your reviews, that's word of mouth. That's what's going to build your business. All right. So fantastic. Um, you know, great job. Keep up all the good work that you guys are doing. We definitely do appreciate your guys' effort. All right. So that's that for this. So now we're going to go over our 5 points, and at the end of this, we will answer the posted questions that you guys have shared either on Facebook or LinkedIn. This week we have one, and that's my fault. I made the post a little bit late, and this week I forgot to put it on LinkedIn. I need to make sure that goes into my social media planner so that we can go ahead and do this. All right. Let me take a look here. All right. So, point one. All right. So, gross margin versus net profit. This is something that your highly successful agencies, our top performers, they have a very, very clear understanding of what this is. So, when we're talking about profits and margins, okay, your gross margin is the bare minimum of doing business. So, for example, if I was a carpenter and I was going to build a deck, I would say I need the cost of materials. So, it would be the wood, the nails, the screws, varnish, sandpaper, things like that. All right, and that is my cost of the construction, and then labor on top of that. So if I'm doing the labor myself, my gross margins would be a little bit higher. So now, but let's assume we're doing this and we have to hire one assistant to labor with us. So now we have to take into account what's it cost to pay the person that's going to be doing some of the work. All right, so if we're charging $3,000 and we have a materials cost of 800 and a labor cost of 600, that means, let's say 700. So that would mean that our gross margin is 50%. Cost of materials, cost of labor versus the total amount billed. Now, that is not taking into account all the other expenses that go with it. So if there are tool rentals, if there are taxes involved in this, licenses, getting the permits, if that is all part of what's falling on us, this is not going to be calculated typically into your gross margin. And it's going to show you what your net is. So, what essentially how this translates into home care is understanding what you're paying your caregivers. So your gross margin is ultimately going to tell you how well you are pricing your services. Before anything, if um, we understand, and before anybody in the comments starts beating me up, the reality is that when we're talking about private pay versus Medicaid now, or VA, or Medicare, a lot of people will tell me, no, the HMOs set the price. Yes, they will set the price, but here's something that you have to understand. In many instances, those prices are negotiable. There's a lot of very specific things that need to happen, and this is something that we do help our clients with a lot of times. There's no guarantee, but you have to have a lot of things in place nor be able to go to the HMO and negotiate. But for the most part, you are right. It is a fixed price, so you have less control over your gross margin. What you do have a lot more control of is your net profit. And that is what's going to tell you how healthy your business truly is. All right. So, recap: gross margin is going to tell you how well you're pricing yourself in the market. How well did you set your price if you're private pay, or how well are you at controlling your payroll costs if you're Medicaid? Are you able to pay your caregivers closer to the minimum wage to make sure you have some sort of a margin in place? There are some agencies that operate razor thin, and I get that. There are some agencies that do have much healthier. So that's what it is. Gross margin is how well you're pricing, net profit is how healthy your business is. So many of these agencies that are at the 2 million or above in revenue, some of them actually lose profit because they have a lot of bloated back end. Okay. So that's just one thing. So, like, for example, I hear this a lot with my clients. Oh, no, no, I am staffing for potential growth, or I am staffing for contingency. That's great until you're sitting there and you're still stuck at $2 million. And now let's say you're a private pay agency where your margins should be a lot better, but now you're looking at it and you're making 8%, instead of somewhere between 15 and 25. Okay. So this is where the problem comes in. Where's your net? Look, I heard this in a movie a long time ago. I wish I can remember. And if please, if anybody watching us, if you do remember the name of the movie, or if you know which movie I'm referring to, please leave it in the comments. I would absolutely love to know. But in the movie, paraphrasing, they pretty much said it doesn't matter how much money you're billing. All that matters is what you keep in your pocket at the end of the day. All right. So just keep that in mind. Know the real difference, and how under knowing your gross margin versus your net profit will impact your business and how it grows. All right. So once again, give us a like, share, and subscribe, and let us know in the comments below. Did that clear it up for you guys? Did Was that bit helpful? Because I do know even some agencies making over 3 million, that people don't have that clear in their head. So moving on, top performing agencies will create tiered value-based pricing. All right. So let me explain what that means. You have a lot of agencies, and again, I work with a lot of people that do this. You ask them, well, what's your pricing based on? Oh, okay, I charge X amount of dollars per hour. All right, fantastic. What about what about any other services you offer? What do you mean? I do hourly. That's it. So straight by the hour business, you can build it to a certain point, but you have to understand a couple of things. If we went, let's go in the Wayback Machine, back to 2014, 2013. Back then, national average was, I think, right around 16, $17 an hour for home care. That means that a person um, who planned out for their retirement would sit there and go, okay, well, I may need help, I may not need help, but I could use the companionship. So people would hire an agency and it was not a big deal. So usually at that point you ran into two tiers of service. You would have some agencies that would run, a companion rate, and then they would run a personal care rate. Prices started going up a little bit. People expected a little bit more value. So now we're moving into like 2015, 2000, after the catastrophe of the destruction of live-in care in 2015 for most of the country, where only a few agencies are still doing that service. Now we started moving into 2016, 2017. Prices went up to an average of like 17 to $19 an hour, 20 in some parts of the country. So what ended up happening there? Now people started looking at it a little bit less of, hey, maybe companionship isn't as important as it was before, so they waited until they needed personal care. So what does this mean? This means back in 2013-14, it would not be uncommon to see somebody 65, 66 years old getting companionship. Just, they're retired, their spouse died, whatever, they were lonely, or family just wanted somebody to hang out with mom when she went to the hairdresser. So it was no big deal. Now we're moving into 2017, 2018. People are now they were trying to get a little bit more. Maybe they were testing the waters with 12 hours, but they were still like 68 to 72. Now we were still looking at home care or looking for assisted livings, things of that nature. So let's fast forward. We get the global pandemic, COVID comes in, and that completely flips the entire economy worldwide upside down. Now, wages start going out of control, which means that that prices for private pay started getting out of control, which means that all of those agencies that were doing Medicaid, if you were in a state that was hesitant or just didn't push forward these Medicaid rates, your agencies were struggling to find good caregivers. And because of COVID in general, a lot of states relaxed regulations, and we saw a huge increase in the gray market. So now what ends up happening is we have pre-COVID and a post-COVID world. Pre-COVID, 70% of all people looking for a home care went through agency. Now that number's, if I'm not mistaken, it's somewhere around 20%. All right, hopefully there's some things going on now that'll raise that number up a little bit. But people are that are in that weird area that where they're they have too much assets or too many assets, too much money, whatever it is, to get Medicaid right away, and but yet are not wealthy enough to get private pay. They're looking for, caregiver X who lives down the street that is going to come in and take care of them. That's a whole other topic for different thing. I've spoken on that topic many times about the risks behind that and how you should be educating your client. But what this means is that now the buyer for home care services, especially in the private pay space, is getting much more sophisticated. The HMOs, because they know they have to pay more in order for some of these agencies, especially the larger providers, the providers that are able to handle one, two, 300, 400 clients from the HMO, they want value-based community care. All right. So what this means is now these agencies, these top performing agencies, we're talking in the private pay space, those that are in that 3 to 5 million mark, 7 million mark, in that area, and those in the Medicaid space. I have a number of clients that are in the 12, 15, 30, even 50 or 60 million range. They are moving away from the flat service and they're moving more into implementing service tiers. So providing more value for the service that's expected, packaging it in a way where the HMOs are getting the value-based community service, and so that the private pay clients now stop looking at the dollar amount and they're seeking out actively what they can get for the service itself. All right. So what all of this means for you as an agency owner is that you have to start looking into, concierge service, not just personal care, but specifically memory care at home, hospital at home, nurse care management, social work driven care management. This value-based pricing or value-based offering increases the quality and supports better margins at the end of the day. If you have a full on concierge service, you can bill that either on a subscription model, or you can bill it as a separate service where you're offering more for the same dollar amount. Those clients, instead of sitting there and either having your caregivers do things like pet care for the clients, or or just telling them no, that they're not there to do this type of cleaning or they're not there to do this service or that service. Now we are taking a look at it from the perspective of, hey, we do this, there's an additional fee, but now we're moving out of the standard service into a white glove or higher value service. Okay. So that is, understanding the value-based model or tiered services. You also have different things like, for example, you can do wellness checks under this. You can do, you can offer, like, if you're in an area that doesn't commonly do live-in care, as long as you structure yourself right, you can actually find ways to implement that. These high growth agencies, they're high growth for a reason. They understand the community needs and the client needs, and they are catering to them. Okay. All right. So if you're struggling, if you're an earlier stage, if you're not quite at the 2 million range and you're hoping to get there one day, the reality is start taking a look at your service offering. Are you just competing with everyone else, or, like crabs in a bucket, or are you finding a way to stand out? So this way you're the one that's getting the phone calls and you're the one that these relationships are being built with. All right. So once again, let us know in the comments. You know, what type of services are you offering? Any value-based services? Is this something you've considered? And if it is, what is it that you're doing to move forward with this? You know, also keep in mind that any I'm sorry, anyone is looking for services with us, just feel free, give us a call or look us up. There's links in the description box on how to get with us and figure all of this out, and we can help you put together some of these things in place. All right, so let's move along now. Another thing that very highly successful agencies, you won't hear them complaining as much about the caregiver shortage. I mean, and if those of you that have followed me for a while, then you'll understand where my rant comes in, where I do not believe that there's a caregiver shortage. I believe very simply that there is a caregiver retention problem in the industry. Once again, very simple test to this. Go out, put an ad on Indeed, and you'll get a bunch of applicants. Now, can you figure out how to get them to show up? Can you figure out how to get them to stay with you and not ghost you on that first case? That's a whole different set of problems, but that's not a shortage issue in the traditional sense. So, how are these highly successful agencies moving their business forward? Well, they redesigned caregiver compensation. They are thinking about long-term retention, and they're thinking about their margins. So a lot of them, they're using something called tiered pay scales and performance incentives. Okay. Also, some of the clients I've worked with, they've put in things like non-cash perks. So you can offer people different benefits with that's not going to affect your bottom line. Okay. So, like, for example, when I had my own agency, one of the things that that I implemented that tremendously helped my maintain my margins is, at the agency we were charging 35 an hour. Okay, that was our base rate for just basic hourly care. Um, and for our and we had a different structure for our facility staffing. But the way it worked is, if you were a new caregiver, I don't mean new like you've never done caregiving professionally before. I mean new to my agency. Okay. So if you were a new hire, we would do is we would pay you $15 an hour. Okay. So that kept my margins a lot higher than 50%. And we made it performance based. So at the end of 30 days, assuming you had no call offs, no lates, and no client complaints, you would receive an additional dollar per hour. And now, the way we measured 30 days, it was not 30 straight calendar days, but at the same time, it was not 30 worked days either. So we had a calculation where we used an average. We kept very close track of our average hours worked per caregiver. So in our agency, it was 30 hours per week. Okay, we try to keep everybody right around 32 hours in order to, and we're going to talk about that here momentarily because we were trying to minimize overtime. So our average caregivers with our part timers and our full timers averaged out to about 30 hours a week. So the we would use multiple caregivers. There's a whole strategy behind this that we're going to get into here. So because it was 30 hours, that means that for 30 days, 1 month, we did that by 4 weeks, it would be 120 hours. So once the caregiver worked 120 hours, she got an additional, he or she, because we had a number of males as well, he or she would get an additional dollar an hour. So they went from 15 to 16. We made sure that they were informed of it, and we made sure that it was automatic. So this way they didn't have to wonder if they were actually going to get it or when they qualified. It was very straightforward. So if we had a caregiver that was working a full 40-hour schedule, he or she would get it in 3 weeks. The purpose was not about time, it was about the number of hours you successfully worked for us. So now we went from 15 to 16. The next bump up came at 90 days, okay, which means an additional 60 days. So when they worked an extra 240 hours on top of after they got their first raise, and once again, we had a whole criteria of how we would figure this out. We would we would factor in attendance, we would factor in lateness, we would factor in compliance with company policy. So, meaning client complaints, if we showed up to do a quality assurance check, were they on their phone? Were they in proper uniform? All of these things, they received points. So, perfect score at the end of 90 days. They were now making a total of $2 more an hour. So they started at 15. They would go somewhere between 17 and $18 an hour, because if they went above performance expectations, meaning now if we have the client calling and saying amazing caregiver, we would reward that. So we had this full scale, it was fully transparent. We would let the caregivers know during orientation. Yes, those of you that are sitting there screaming at your screen right now, yes, it did cut down on applicants. But once our caregivers realized that we were legitimately going to pay them more money, that we legitimately did this scale, and more importantly, that they got an evaluation annually, that they would be rewarded for doing the work as expected, and that they would be prorated down. It wasn't automatically, if they were late once, they didn't automatically lose their dollar an hour. They would be prorated, and it would they would be counseled, that would be explained, and now it became clear and transparent communication. Everybody knew the expectations and everyone was okay with it. Some of our candidates said, I'm making 18 at another agency. I'm not coming here to start at 15. And we would say, well, okay, not a problem whenever, but we're always here if you want, and this is how it worked. Yeah, you're going to lose some talent, but at the end of the day, transparency and the ability to continue to earn was never an issue. By that note, I also did have it also gave me enough flexibility in my margins to where I had a handful of caregivers that were truly excellent, that were with us for a couple of years. They were making 20 or 21 an hour because we had the cushion built into the overall margin structure, since we were making a much higher margin with the new caregivers, and because of the rate of turnaround in the industry, we were able to apply this. All right, that's the one thing. Another thing that we particularly did, and that I've implemented with a lot of my higher growth agencies, it's structured bonuses tied to work hours, attendance, and everything else, client satisfaction. So we would, even with my own clients to this day, I am very, very much a proponent. I am very for quality assurance. There's certain things that processes that you can look through the YouTube channel and find. I did a whole presentation on this a couple of years ago on how this process works. You need to be able to go and check on your caregivers. You have to speak to your clients on a regular interval. Um, Not just about, not when the caregiver's there, but when they're without their caregiver. You need to make sure that you have the ability to speak to your caregivers when they're not with the clients. People are less honest if they feel that they're being judged. Okay. Now, that also means you need to do unannounced check ins where you have the schedule, you speak to the client regularly so you know what's going on, which will give you the opportunity to come in and to your talk to your clients about how they are doing with the service. Does a number of things. But when all of this happens, you you can offer a bonus. It's a small quarterly bonus because the a happy client, a good high performing caregiver means a happy client. Happy client means a client that stays with you longer. And that means that that caregiver, their overall value to your company increases. The longer your client lifetime value, the more profit you will draw from a caregiver. All right. The other thing that we used to really focus on, and that I have a lot of my clients focus on, is creating incentives. Little things. It could be a number of different things. There's a lot of ways to do it. There's a lot of companies that'll help track this. But what's one of the biggest gripes that a lot of agencies have? Oh, I'm running into overtime because I nobody wants to cover these weird shifts. Well, if you have these systems in place, think about it like the old Chinese food punch cards, back way back when in the 80s and 90s and early 2000s. Like some places I know still do this. If you're a repeat customer, they punch the little card and now you can get a free meal. Well, same concept. If your caregiver takes 10 short notice shifts in a row, or 5 or 3 or whatever number you want to set, there's an incentive tied to it. It's a one-time thing. It's not an overall expense. Like for example, one of the things we used to do is we would cover our caregiver's cell phone bill when they did that up to $100. So if they had one of those plans that were like $300, not my problem. But we would cover $100 of it. We would have them bring in their cell phone bill and we would pay it. This way, it wasn't something that they would see in their paycheck that was taxed to death, and now you look like you're full of crap. Okay, it's because you're sitting there and you're actively pursuing it with them. All right, so that's number three. Making sure that your caregiver compensation is designed with retention and your overall margin in mind. All right, so let's move on. One of my favorite topics here: the that successful agencies, high performing agencies, will minimize overtime with proactive scheduling and float pools. All right, what do we mean? Look, I just did a webinar yesterday. Visit our website to see the replay coming soon. It'll be available sometime this coming week. And if, depending on when you're watching this, you may actually be able to look for the webinar on YouTube, depending on when it is. If you're seeing this within a month of the date that it was posted, you're not going to find it on YouTube. You're going to have to go to our website to look for it. If you're looking, if it's over a month, then that means you're watching this after the fact. And please, you should be able to find it on YouTube somewhere. What do I now, based on this, the reason I was talking about this is because of proactive scheduling. Your scheduling software, all right, you should be able to use it to forecast and put a cap on overtime. Industry standard says, there's a lot of experts out there that will tell you, oh, it should never be more than 3% of total payroll. I'm going to tell you, if it's non-billable overtime, if it's overtime that you will never get paid for, then it should be less than 1%. If it is overtime that you can bill for it, then it's not really impacting your bottom line, unless you've got your overtime structured improperly with the client. So, as long as your pricing structure is good, then that's really what it's going to look at. 3% is industry standard, 1% is where I think, less than 1% is where I think everyone should try to go for. Sometimes easier said than done. How are you going to reduce this? Well, one of the methods I talked about on our previous topic, that's making sure that you have, for example, a cap on the amount of hours that a caregiver can work at a time. All right. Well, meaning, I always to recommend to my clients put the cap at 32 hours. Does this mean you'll never have a caregiver working 40? No. the What this means is that if you have caregivers that are working 32 hours and somebody needs to call out, it gives you a bigger pool of caregivers that you can reach out to cover that shift, even if it's an 8-hour shift. The What ends up happening is, when we're looking at this overall, what ends up happening is that, even if you have like a 12-hour shift somebody needs to cover, you're only going to end up eating 4 hours of overtime if it's your fault that the overtime was created. So this gives you much more flexibility. It lets you create something called a floater, which means people that are going to do pickup shifts. And again, it's about expanding that pool. It's also going to reduce the dependency on, one of my biggest pet peeves in home care is clicks. You'll have a scheduler that'll have her favorite 8 to 10 caregivers. Oh, I'm just going to call them right away because they always show up. Well, that's going to kill your overtime and it's going to destroy your profit. All right. So, unless you are very diligent in making sure that's not happening, it's more than likely happening on some scale or another. And by setting a cap at 32 hours, it's going to reduce that amount of overtime and it's also going to increase the pool. It's also going to create another thing that a lot of people don't think about. When caregivers aren't making their 40 hours and they really need to, they're going to be in much more contact with the agency in order to try to make up those extra hours. Okay. So that's the other thing that it tends to do. All right. So putting these things in place will help reduce that. There's other scheduling tactics that you can use in order to minimize these issues when it comes to the your overtime problems and your caregiver scheduling issues. Okay. So let's go to our last point. It's benchmarking. Okay. So we just talked about a lot of different things in these first 4 points here. Just to quickly recap, you know, first thing you need to make sure is that you understand the real difference between how gross margin and net profits affect your business. Gross margins tell you how well you're setting up your pricing and payroll. Your net profit tells you how healthy your business actually is. We also then talked about, building a tiered value-based pricing model. So including different services, some may cost the company money, some may not. Look at your model, whether you're a private pay, Medicaid, VA, something in between, some combination thereof, and figure out a pricing strategy or a value-based model that works for you. We talked then about, redesigning your caregiver compensation, making sure that retention and your margins are at top of mind. There's a lot of ways to reward your caregivers that don't necessarily break the bank. One-off rewards can be very effective, a strategy, as long as they're done right. I'm a big believer, and I've talked about this a lot. Again, anyone who's followed me for a while will know that, when you're compensating any staff, try to fix a problem for them. Be the hero, not the a-hole. Okay. So, meaning, fix a problem, resolve an issue that's tangible for them instead of telling them, hey, I'm going to include an extra $100 in your paycheck. Now, if you classify it as a bonus, they lost 50% of it. So you never gave them $100, you gave them 50 and you're the a-hole, even though you've accomplished the same thing versus doing like the example that I did was cover a cell phone bill or another bill for them with a maximum value of $100, but have them bring the bill to you, you pay it in front of them. Okay. So now it becomes a tangible reward. All right. So, and then finally, we talked about so far is minimizing overtime with, proactive scheduling and things like that. Set caps. If you're not comfortable setting caps, figure out, set up dedicated floaters, people whose only purpose in life is to cover shifts. There's some caregivers that like to work like that. You know, um, just some of the things I've seen and done over time. You have this bigger pool. The bigger your pool of floaters, the better. And keep a very, very strict eye on non-billable overtime. There's some overtime that you just can't avoid. You really can't find a shift on Mother's Day, and you have a client that can't be left alone for safety reasons. You're going to do whatever it takes to get that case covered, including putting someone into overtime and probably overpaying at that. Okay. So things like that you got to keep in mind and mitigate all of that. And that leads us to some common benchmarks. So if we're looking at the, uh, if we're looking at your numbers, these are some of the targets that you should be going after. Okay. Um, so if we're looking at your gross margin, it now I gotta say, take this with a grain of salt. If we're looking, let's talk about government payer source first, like Medicaid and the VA. So Medicaid, depending on what state you're in, your gross margin could be as low as 26 to 28%. And there's some states that allows for a gross margin to be as high as, 32 to 38%. Then you have some outlying states that have really good payouts, and they'll even allow you to have as high as like 40 to 45%. Okay. So that's Medicaid. So it's really going to depend on the state you're in. So if we really want to talk about range, it could be as low as 26%, as high as like 45% or higher. When we're talking about the VA, again, depending on what state, how, where you are in that state, number of other factors, your margins could be as good as, like 35, 40% on the low end, or on the high end, I mean, it could be about 150%. Okay, even higher in some areas. Like if you're in an extremely rural area and you could find people that'll work for cheap, the VA pays well. So, when that what that means is for private pay, and again, it depends on your model. I know a lot of hybrid agencies, meaning agencies that work with Medicaid for so long, they become comfortable working with the lower margins. So when it comes to private pay, I've seen agencies maintain a gross margin as low as 35%. You know, my general rule of thumb is, if you're looking at your expenses in the private pay space, typically you're losing money at anything under 30%. So just keep an eye on that. And even if you're used to the lower margins of Medicaid, try not to let your gross go below 30. Okay. Um, Ideally, I always tell my clients you want to be in that 50 to 52% range, because this way it'll cover your employer burden. But if we wanted to put a just industry average, it's probably somewhere around 42 to 45%. Okay. People don't like to raise prices when they should be, or they wait too long to do it, and then wage requirements keep going up, so their margins drop. Now, what does that translate into? Well, that translates into a net profit from anywhere ranging from about 5% all the way as high as 25%. With the, I'm going to say, industry average being somewhere between 13 and 20. Okay. If you're highly efficient, you can hit 25%. I'm going to tell you, out of all my clients, only a handful actually achieve 25% on private pay home care. Most of them hover right around, 16 to 20%, with a few outliers, like I said, going 22 to 25%. Overtime industry is hovers right around 3%, or under 3% is like the benchmark. I say that you should strive for under 1% because even if you're not hitting that number, you should be looking at what's causing that number and then taking it from there. Your retention should be around 80%. It's not. I already know it's not. I mean, most of your caregivers are quitting within 30 days, and only about 20% of them are actually making it to the 90-day mark. But your goal should be 80% over the course of a year. Means a lot of hiring, means a lot of other things, but you should strive for it, even if it's not attainable. Realistically, you're you're doing really well if you're attaining a 50% retention rate, for caregivers. You know, um, for clients, you're looking at an average of about 5% attrition month over month as an industry. Hopefully, you're not doing, oh, excuse me, numbers that are that bad. And then there's other benchmarks, like typical revenue per caregiver per hour. You should be looking at somewhere between $5 and $15 per hour is your target gross for caregivers. All right. Again, depending on where it is. All right. So tell me, what are you guys' thoughts? Do these numbers make sense? How close is your agency to this target? And is this something that you guys think is achievable? So once again, don't forget to give us a like, and don't forget to share and share this with somebody that can benefit. And if you're watching us on YouTube, subscribe to our channel. Last but not least, we have our weekly viewer posted question. This week, I said is only one because I messed up and I did not post it on time. It's been a crazy week. We are growing and expanding, so we have some more new clients to onboard, and we've recently expanded into home health and hospice, and into the Medicaid space. So this is causing a few hiccups internally, and we're gonna get our systems back in order. So the question for today is: can you discuss how to onboard new CNAs and nurses? And this was posted by Sharon Malone. Oh, excuse me. So, all right, Sharon. Onboarding new CNAs and nurses, just it, it's really not overly complicated. You know, when you go through the process, onboarding actually begins at the moment that they respond to the ad. So make sure you have a high amount of communication and that you're collecting things in a timely manner. When you applied for licensing, you had to create policies. If you purchased them and you did not read them, please do yourself a favor and go back through. The state is usually pretty clear on what the requirements are for background checks, drug testing, other processes when it comes to that. The other thing is make sure that you are properly submitting your W-4s for the federal and your W-4s for the state. Caregivers should not be 1099. CNAs, nurses should not be 1099. And nurses can be in some very, very narrow circumstances, but not typically. If you have a supervising nurse on staff, that means you have somebody who is going to dictate how they do their job and when they do it, and that they are being monitored. And by being monitored, that means they are not independent contractors. So unless you're meeting some very strict criteria, be sure to do that. Also, if you're not already enrolled in, excuse me, in E-Verify, um, you should at least be collecting I-9s. I'm not going to get into the rest of this, whether immigration and everything else. Just make sure that you do your own research and that you are looking for, that the person is legally able to work in the United States. Okay, that's a big one. Now, as far as the rest of it goes, make sure that you have a good hiring packet. where you're including a employee handbook, and not just an employee handbook. All of your policies should be in there, and they should all be readily available. But when you're in orientation, there's going to be some policies that are particularly important to your agency. Maybe your clock in, clock out procedures, your drug testing procedures, your uh, maybe you have a policy on pest infestation because let's say you work in an area that has a lot of instances of bed bugs, or if you're in a Medicaid agency and one of the buildings where you have a number of clients, they recently had a roach infestation. These are things that can happen. Or let's say, for example, you're in a state like Connecticut, where you have to have these OSHA rules in place where these policies outline safety, caregiver and nurse visit safety. So all of these things you have to make sure that they're not just looked at, and because most people just take the employee handbook, sign for it, and throw that thing in the trash. There are some specific policies like cell phone usage, that's a big one, that you're going to want them signed again, acknowledged. A lot of times that'll be done during orientation. Talk about your mission, your vision, talk about expectations. Like, what do you expect from your caregivers? And on the other side of it, what can they expect out of you, as an agency? If I have an issue with my coordinator, my scheduler, is there someone else I can go to? Am I going to be ignored? Well, all of these things you have to make sure that they're in place. So that is how you onboard them once you do orientation. Depending on the size of your agency and where you are in business, I do highly recommend implementing a mentorship program as soon as possible. Meaning, set them up with a more experienced caregiver to work, you know, somewhere between like 4 and 6 hours within a week or two. This way, you have them on the books, you have them in the schedule, you know how reliable they are, and if you have caregivers that are dedicated group of mentors, they will also give you the feedback as to whether this person is good or not. Excuse me for all the yawning and everything. I've it's all this video is almost an hour long, and I'm tired. It's been a long day. So, so these are all things that you want to make sure that you're looking at. Make sure your scheduling software has all the proper flags in place, so that this way, if like for CNAs and for nurses in particular, you got to make sure that their licensing is up to date so that you're collecting all of this. If your caregivers are driving your clients around, or you intend them to drive your clients around or run errands, make sure you have a copy of their driver's license. Make sure you have their insurance, that you have flags set up in your system so that when your insurance runs out, that you have the most current insurance policy on file. And communication is key, and make sure you have a good 30, 60, 90 plan for any new employee, including your caregivers. This way, these are sets of expectations and a process for you to scale down supervision and communication. Having a good 30, 60, 90 plan for any staff member will reduce employee turnover tremendously, because your caregivers and your other staff are going to feel properly supported. All right. So I hope that answers your question for the most part. All right. Um, I didn't know. I mean, unless you reach out and give me a much more specific set of questions that you want us to go over. That's onboarding in a nutshell. But always keep in mind, if you do have anything you would like for us to talk about, or have a question, find us on any social media platform. Except X, we're not too much on X, but you can comment on any of our videos. You can comment on any post on Facebook, our Facebook business page, my own personal Facebook page, our groups. You can find us on LinkedIn. You can even send us an email at info@thebrionesgroup.com or office@thebrionesgroup.com and submit your questions. Let us know what you want us to discuss. All right. So, and once again, thank you guys for joining us. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel so to let us know that you are interested in what we have to say. And that's pretty much where we are right now. You guys have a great rest of your day, depending on when you're watching this. Enjoy your weekend, enjoy your week, enjoy your month. Have a good one, and take care of each other.